Well, welcome, Leah.
Awesome. Thanks, Erin. I'm really excited to be here and I really appreciate you bringing me to present today. Like Erin said, my name is Leah Holloway. I'm the program manager with Milwaukee Riverkeeper. And we are a science-based advocacy organization, and we work in a lot of different ways to protect Milwaukee's rivers. And we're also the Great Lakes Riverkeeper or Great Lakes Keeper. So the rivers in Milwaukee feed into Lake Michigan. So everything that we do in our watershed also impacts the Great Lakes watershed. And one of the ways that we work to protect our rivers and restore them is by conducting trash cleanups. And in the process of doing that, we were finding that so much of the trash that we were finding is plastic. And so we started to think about ways that we could maybe cut down on plastic in the front end and not just be cleaning it up in the back end. And so that's how we got involved with Plastic Free MKE. Plastic Free MKE is a movement of dedicated volunteers, activists, nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and other groups all working together around our mission of reducing the harms of unnecessary plastics and the harms that they have on environmental health, public health, and social justice in Milwaukee. So today I'm going to cover a little bit about why plastics are so harmful. We don't always think about the public health impacts of plastics, why they're so hard to get rid of, and ways that we can all take action to make a difference. It's a really big problem, and it's kind of going to take a little bit of all of us working together to start fixing it. So that's kind of where we're going today. Like Erin said, we'll do some poll questions throughout. And yeah, feel free to add questions into the chat because I love to hear your thoughts on plastics as well. So a little bit of background on plastic in general. It was invented in 1907. And every piece of plastic ever created since then pretty much still exists. There's no really throwing it away. You can burn it, you can recycle it, and you can dump it in a landfill or an ocean. But otherwise it's still here. Plastic production has increased more than 20 times over just the last 50 years alone. And really plastic usage really began to take off in the 80s. And so since then, that's when most of the plastic production and usage and disposal has happened. And demand for plastic is expected to continue growing over the next few years. So products don't rise in demand for no reason. It's difficult to imagine when we look at pictures like this of just massive piles of plastic in landfills. But plastic actually does have some benefits. We have to give it a little bit of credit. It's lightweight, it's easy to carry, it makes our food last longer, it's convenient, it's very cheap, and it doesn't break down, which in some situations is a benefit, right? So thinking about like lightweight medical prosthetics, plastic tubing for electrical wires to help prevent fires, wrappings to preserve food for a long time. So when we need to like store and distribute food in cases of emergencies and things like that. Plastic joint implants are really sturdy and don't degrade in the body as quickly. So there are some very real benefits to plastic. But if that's the case, then what is the problem? Where did we go wrong with plastics? It's not our usage of plastics, it's our overuse, single use, and improper disposal of plastics that's really leading to the harms that we'll talk about today. So like most environmental problems, plastic has negative effects at different biological scales and at different levels and sizes of complexity. And so it impacts human health every step of the way. And like I mentioned earlier, that's the part of plastic that we don't really hear about a lot. We just think about it as trash in our rivers and lakes and underground. But there's actually a lot of other impacts that I think it's really important that we start thinking about. First of all, looking at a global scale, plastic contributes to climate change in two ways. So the production of plastic involves burning a lot of fossil fuels. So to create 1 pound of plastic, we actually burn about 3 pounds of carbon dioxide. And then on the back end, as plastic breaks down, it actually produces methane, which is, as most of you I'm sure know, is a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon. So just using plastic in general is actually driving climate change. About 8% of the world's oil production is currently used to create plastics, but that's expected to rise to 20% by 2050. And that's partly because as we shift to more renewable sources of energy, the oil companies are looking for new ways to make money, and they found that in plastics. So they're going to continue to push new plastic products on us because they want to have a perpetual source of revenue. A new report from the advocacy group Beyond Plastics argues that plastics are on track to be a bigger driver of climate change than coal. So this isn't just a little thing. This is a big problem that we need to be paying attention to. So that's kind of like the global climate change scale. If we take a deeper dive into how they act in the environment, particularly in the Great Lakes region, plastics on the ground get washed into our rivers and then into our Great Lakes system. And so you may have heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in the ocean where all the trash is collected in one spot. There's actually 5 of these patches throughout the world. We hear about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch the most. It's 3 times the size of France. So it's big, but it's all concentrated in these 1 places or 5 places throughout the world. And so it's a little bit easier, ironically, to find ways to clean those up. The Great Lakes don't work the same way as our oceans do. Our currents don't form gyres, but instead they distribute the plastic evenly, and they push the larger pieces towards the beaches. And this makes it harder and more difficult to quantify and clean up our plastics. And then again, unlike the oceans where plastic pollution can literally come from anywhere in the world, plastic in the Great Lakes is from the Great Lakes region. It's our plastic. So we can't blame anyone else for the plastic that's winding up in the Great Lakes. There's about 22 million pounds of plastics entering the Great Lakes each year. Specifically for me here in Milwaukee, 11 million pounds is entering Lake Michigan. So Lake Superior doesn't have quite the plastic load that Lake Michigan does. But as you know, the Great Lakes are all connected, and so the system is impacted pretty equally. So this is a study done by one of our partners, Alliance for the Great Lakes. This is their 2019 Adopt a Beach litter data, and it's showing that the majority of all aquatic litter in the Great Lakes is plastics. So it's really important that we address this issue as much as we can. Plastic in our waterways comes in many different shapes and sizes. Some of the plastics are littered in tiny pieces to begin with. You may have heard of nurdles, which are little tiny plastic pellets that are the raw material for other plastic materials. They get melted down and shaped into whatever you want out of plastics. There's also microfibers that are coming from our synthetic clothing. So anytime you wear synthetic clothing, you may be shedding plastic fibers and breathing those in. Every time you wash those synthetic clothing, more microfibers are being washed into our water systems through the laundry. So those are tiny pieces that just exist. They're just small pieces that get into our environment. Other plastic litter enters our waterways in big pieces, like a water bottle, and breaks down over time through the sun, through wave and wind action, and they eventually break down into smaller pieces of plastic called microplastics. And these plastics in our waterways become plastics in us in several different ways. So one way is that those tiny pieces of plastic enter the food chain when they're ingested by critters, both large and small living in the Great Lakes. I've seen some really fascinating pictures of zooplankton, which are the tiniest little critters living in the Great Lakes. And they have plastics in their system. And then those, of course, are the basis for the Great Lakes food chain. So they get eaten by little fish, which are eaten by bigger fish, which are eaten by bigger fish. And so those plastics accumulate in the fish. And then in turn, accumulate in us. We're a part of that food chain. So when we eat these fish, these microplastics end up on our dinner plates. These pieces of plastic are also so small, they can't easily be filtered out by our water treatment plants. Milwaukeeans and about 40 million other people in the Great Lakes region get our drinking water from the Great Lakes. And so the plastics in the lakes also winds up in our water. So some studies have shown that 93% of bottled water and 100% of beer brewed in the Great Lakes region contains microplastics. 85% of the fish from the Milwaukee River had plastic fibers in their intestinal tract. There's some studies that suggest that the average person eats about a credit card worth of plastic every single week. That's coming from our air, our water, and our food. And there's no real avoiding it. You can't eat a cleaner diet and avoid it. It's literally everywhere. So plastic it doesn't sound great to be eating it in the first place, but plastic is made of many different chemicals. Scientists are still researching the specific long-term effects of these chemicals in our bodies. But this is some of the research that we kind of know already. Phthalates, BPA, which you have probably heard of, and other chemicals are in the plastics. And then also plastic has been found to absorb toxins out of water. So now the plastic that's entering our water is even more toxic than it was to begin with. Pollutants like these chemicals don't just pass through our bodies, they can build up in our muscles or fat, where they continue to leach toxins into our bodies until our liver can get rid of them. And again, we just don't know what those impacts are. Maybe they're not having a big impact, but maybe they are. And the research just isn't there to really give us a clear picture yet. But some of these chemicals, they are starting to see how they're hormone disruptors, they're linked to cancer and other issues in our bodies. So why is plastic so hard to fix? Learning about plastic pollution can lead to a lot of shame about consumer choices that are often beyond our control. So it's really important to understand that the difficulty of solving the plastic issue, we need to just destigmatize plastic use and transfer the blame and accountability from individual consumers, ourselves, to where it actually belongs, which is the whole system. We can all make choices to keep ourselves and our planet healthier. However, to really fix this problem, we're going to need more than just us as individuals making the effort. And so we'll talk a little bit about that system. Here's the life cycle of plastic, from extraction to production to point of sale to consumers to disposal, and usually it winds up getting burned in one way or another. We only have control over one of those steps, right, as consumers. Everything else is happening behind the scenes and we don't have a lot of control over that. So that's what I mean when I say that plastic is a whole system and we have to be able to look at all these different pieces in order to make a real difference. And even on the consumer level, plastic hides where we don't always expect it. So it can be really difficult for us as consumers to make good informed choices. Metal cans are lined with plastic. We think about like our shampoo and conditioner coming in plastic containers, but also they contain plastics themselves to make them more spreadable. We want that nice consistency, right? Holidays are coming up, they're upon us, and a lot of us are buying gifts and wrapping gifts for our loved ones. A lot of times wrapping paper, especially if it's like glittery or metallic and shiny, a lot of that is actually plastic. It's not paper, it's not recyclable, and it just has to go into the landfill. And then other things like some materials that are made to look like wood or granite or stone are actually often made of plastic to reduce costs. And then, of course, much of our food and other consumer goods come wrapped in plastic, sometimes more plastic than the material itself on the inside. So it's really hard to avoid. And that's why at Plastic Free MKE, we work really hard to destigmatize and take the blame off of consumers. And we try and think about the system as a whole. So here in Wisconsin, we are really limited in what we can do to get rid of plastics through legislation. All of the states here in orange have a preemption or a ban on bans. And this means that we cannot, like for instance, the city of Milwaukee cannot put a ban or a tax or a fee on any sort of auxiliary container. So that includes bags, cups, other types of plastic containers. We were able to get around that a little bit with straws. So Milwaukee does have a straw ban in effect. And that's because a straw isn't a container. It's a mode of transportation. So we kind of got around that loophole. But that we still can't do anything about the rest of the plastic materials on a city level. So there are some current legislative actions at the state level to ban styrofoam and to repeal the ban on bans. However, they're not getting a lot of traction right now. So just a quick note on straw bans while we're talking about them. In Milwaukee, we were really careful to include language that exempts the ban for folks who might need to use a plastic straw for various reasons. If you look at this chart, all of the different types of straws available have some sort of issue that make it not super usable for everyone. So we wanted to make sure we weren't excluding or harming anyone with the ban in Milwaukee. We think it's really important to talk about so that, for instance, if you're out dining at your favorite local restaurant, you see somebody like requesting a plastic straw, we again want to get away from that like instant, like, oh man, what are they doing? They're killing the environment. That reaction can be really easy for some of us to come to, but they might need a plastic straw for different reasons. So we just want to talk about the equity and accessibility aspects as well. So what can you do? I feel like here's a good time to launch some of the polls. Erin, do you want to launch the first question? And so Erin's got a few questions she's going to put up there, and you can just kind of, just cycle through them. So the first one is, how many items made of plastic can you see from where you are right now? We just talked about how plastic is everywhere. It's in so much of our lives. So just kind of take a quick glance around you and make a quick count. What's around you? even though I work really hard to reduce my plastic consumption, I can still see several items right in front of me that are made of plastic. So, and it looks like a lot of you are finding the same. So far, everyone's got at least 6 pieces of plastic in front of them.
Yeah, I see the numbers changing. Over 60% of folks here in the room have participated. Oh, we just reached 70. So yeah, it looks like 6 to 15 or 16 or more.
Yeah, it's a lot of plastic. It's just everywhere in our lives. All right, do you want to move on to the next question?
Yes, absolutely. I'm just gonna put up these results real quick so you can see kind of where it landed.
Yeah, for sure.
Looks like 68% of folks who filled this out, yeah, put 16 or more. I'm just looking like even just at what I'm wearing, and could probably count 16 things. Each button on my shirts is probably plastic. All right,
yeah,
so
my pants are synthetic.
Let me go to the next poll question and I'll launch that.
Cool, thank you. So this again is just looking at the types of plastic that we use most often. I'm always curious to see where people fall in this. Everyone's got different things that they rely on. For me, it's prepackaged foods. I love, love, love those prepackaged salads, and Erin knows this about me because we've talked about it. That is the best way for me to get vegetables into my body, and it comes in like every single thing comes in plastic, right? And it's very hard to get rid of those. Some people rely on plastic bags when they're shopping. Either they don't have access to, or they forget, reusable bags, or just have never thought about it before, which is very common. And it looks like as answers are coming in, we're seeing a lot of takeout or prepared food containers. Oh my gosh, going to the grocery store and just getting that, the prepared food bar. So easy on a busy weeknight. Definitely do that. Okay. Plastic bags, prepackaged foods look like they're winning on this one.
Yep, and I see some others. So if people have other single-use plastics and you're willing to share in the chat, feel free to put those in there if you like. I will, since we're close to 80% participating, I'll just give it one more second because I know it's fun to participate in a poll.
For sure, and I'd love to see what everyone's answers are. So yeah, if you share in the chat, I'd love to hear what your other is.
That's a great point, Janice. The packages that come when you order things online, those plastic bags. Yep.
Oh my gosh, yeah, the mailers. And then like you think about like the gifts that we're all buying for the littles in our lives, they come so heavily like packaged in plastic, you can't even get into them.
So I shared the results. Everybody can kind of see. You already summarized. Do you want me to go to the next question?
Yeah, go to the next one.
All right. Disappeared. All right.
Ooh, this is a good one. We're just talking about plastic bags. How many do you think the average person in the US uses in a year? Seeing a lot of answers coming in quick. I'll be honest, this is a little bit of a trick question, so no pressure on getting this one right. Okay, looks like everyone's answered.
All right, I will share those results.
Awesome, thanks. So most of you said 1,000, which is, I was gonna say great, but it's, we use a lot of plastic bags in the US. The answer, we used to think it was 500. That turns out it's the low end of the average that a person in the US uses. New research has shown that it's somewhere between 500 and 1,500, which is a huge average. I have a picture, I think, later on of Plastic Free MKE's Plastic Bag Monster, which is a costume that we've created out of 500 plastic bags. We have 2 of them now because it was really easy to find 1,000 plastic bags. And yeah, this is the average number of plastic bags that a person in the US uses a year. And that is a lot of plastic. And most of those don't get reused. They get thrown away. They can't be easily recycled. You cannot put them in your curbside recycling no matter where you live. They do a lot of damage to the machines, and they can put the workers in danger as well. So they need to be recycled in a store. like take them back to Target or your grocery store or wherever you got them from. So they're not easily recycled. They blow around in the environment like crazy. And yeah, most of them wind up either in the environment or in the landfill. So that's a lot of plastic bags for sure. Okay. Do you want to go on to the next one, Erin?
Yep, should be popping up soon.
Awesome, thank you. So this is the one I'm really excited about. And this is kind of a preview question to the section that we're about to talk about. So what is the most effective way to reduce plastic waste? So basically, what can you do? I just want to kind of get a sense for what you're thinking now are the most impactful ways that we as individuals can help with this. And actually, let's leave this one open. And I'm going to go through these different steps. So feel free to answer now, or you can save your answer for as we get a little bit further along in the presentation. Is that okay, Erin, if we just leave it open for a bit?
Yeah, I believe so. I'm not sure. People may have to scoot it out of their way to see the presentation, but you should be able to move the poll box out of your way. But if that's an issue, somebody just pop in the chat and let me know.
Yeah, let us know. We can also go through it now if that's weird for everybody. So just let us know. But in the meantime, I will minimize it on my screen and then get into this a little bit. So like we've talked about, a lot of this is beyond our control. There are a lot of things that we as individuals can do to be a part of the solution. Progress, not perfection, is our goal. So we don't need a few people living perfectly plastic-free lives, probably unattainable, to be honest. But if everyone does a little bit, it does make a big difference for sure. So I'm going to challenge you to think about some of the things that we're going to talk about that you're already doing, and maybe another way that you could add to your life. Anything that you could start to do moving forward. And if you are able to take on a new plastic-free challenge, and not everyone is, and that's fine too, we do encourage you to start really small. Just do one thing at a time. We don't want anyone to be overwhelmed or totally have to change their lives because that's not sustainable in your life. And it can lead to a lot of stress and feeling guilty if you're not able to maintain that or live up to it. So start slowly and add on as you're able is kind of our way of going about it. So the first suggestion that people normally come up with is cleaning up litter, and that's awesome. That's a huge part of my job at Milwaukee Riverkeeper is picking up litter. We do cleanups that take about 150,000 pounds of trash out of our waterways every year, and that's a really important part of the solution. However, it's not everything, right? It'd be better if we could stop some of that from getting into the environment in the first place before it can do any damage. So we know that we can't stop at just picking up litter, and that's why Milwaukee Riverkeeper joined the plastic-free MKE movement. The next solution is recycling. Hopefully a lot of us are thinking about what we can and can't recycle in our communities. It's a really, again, important step, but it can't be the only long-term solution that we're looking at. For instance, a lot of plastics aren't recyclable. Recycling is an economic market. And so the recyclers have to be able to sell the recycled plastics. And that's just not the case. Some plastics are too hard to recycle. Some just don't have a good market. They don't have a good end product. So a lot of plastic does still wind up in the landfill. Only about 2% of plastics are effectively recycled in the world. So it's not great. So again, part of the solution, but not the only solution. So it's really important that you are only recycling what your community allows. Otherwise, it's actually more expensive for your municipality or your recycler to take it out on the back end. In Wisconsin, recycling is the law. Cities must provide recycling for all, single to 4 family houses. Private companies and large apartment complexes are required to provide it on their own. But there's a lot of confusion there about what is and isn't recyclable. So it's really important that you know what is recyclable. Plastic-Free MKE recently hosted a webinar on recycling in Milwaukee. So we brought in someone from the Department of Public Works to talk about really what is and what isn't recyclable in Milwaukee. And it was really popular because there is so much confusion around what's recyclable. That is available on our Facebook page if anyone's interested in seeing it. But it's not super relevant to you all because most of you don't live in Milwaukee. Another reason why recycling can't be our only solution is that plastics are downcycled. Unlike glass or metal, which can be recycled pretty much forever, Plastics are downcycled, which means a plastic water bottle isn't turned into another plastic water bottle. It's turned into a t-shirt or some of that deck planking that you see on your screen. And it could only be recycled so many times before it just has to get thrown away because the material itself is so degraded that it's not usable anymore. So this is another reason why recycling is not the best solution. The one that really gets me is that, like I mentioned, recycling is an economic market. It relies on a lot of space and labor and resources. Recycling can be very, very dangerous and toxic. So it's one that the US and many Western countries have traditionally outsourced to other countries in order to save money and to keep pollution out of sight and out of mind in our world. But then we're just shifting that burden onto someone else, usually people who don't have the resources that we do. So plastic is piled up, it's sorted by hand, it's cleaned and then melted to make new plastics. When plastics are burned or melted down, all those toxic plastic chemicals we talked about go into the air, which further drives climate change and leads to severe health risks for the people who are a part of that system. So recycling can be, it's a big environmental justice issue that we talk about a lot. In Milwaukee, we do our own recycling. We actually do have our own market and our own, we sort it and sell it here in Milwaukee, but that's pretty rare in the United States. And again, even that has its issues. So recycling is a part of the solution. It's not the only solution. We as individuals can also reduce our plastic use. There's a lot of sustainable products that are coming on the market that we can buy to help us cut our single-use plastics out. These items can be expensive sometimes. A lot of them aren't readily available everywhere, so you might not have the same options that people in bigger communities might have. But here are some really common ones. You can use a reusable bottle, you can make or buy a reusable bag, you can shop secondhand, make gifts from scratch. Again, it's the holiday season, so thinking about what can you make or can you give experiences to your friends and family? What else can you do to avoid buying more stuff? Whenever possible, you can say no to plastic straws and utensils. Bring your own. I have a fork and a knife and a spoon from my kitchen in my purse, and I just take those with me everywhere. So it's always best to use what you have first, then borrow or shop for secondhand items, and then buy something new that is high quality and built to last, and preferably not made of plastics when possible. But as we've talked about, that's really difficult to do. So there's not always a better option out there for you. One of the things that we do at Plastic Free MKE is encourage people to take a pledge and again, look at maybe one of the most common types of single-use plastics and think about how can I cut that out of my life just a little bit more. So maybe it's plastic straws, maybe it's those bags or cups, like coffee cups, maybe it's utensils or maybe it's water bottles. If you can cut all of them out, great. But again, that's a huge step. We are more powerful than we think. Again, our little actions do add up to make a big difference. So we do encourage you to think about, is there something that you can do to maybe cut just a little bit more plastic out of your life? Our last solution that we want to talk about is acting with others. It's going to take more than just our own personal choices. So we need to share the changes that we're making, challenge your friends or family members to join you in your actions, write letters, join Plastic Free MKE or other groups that may be doing similar actions. There's a national one called Break Free from Plastic Pollution. They do a lot of good actions. We just say we like to get drastic about plastic with others. So it multiplies your impact. Always remember that giving up plastic is hard and we need to be kind to each other as we all learn together. And we don't need a few people doing it perfectly. We need many people doing it imperfectly, like I mentioned before. So it's all about those little steps that we can all take. And so all of the solutions that we've talked about so far really do put the burden of responsibility on us as individuals. But at Plastic Free MKE, like I've mentioned, we really believe that we need to change the whole system to really make an impact. So in order to accomplish that, our elected leaders need to hear from us. And they need to understand how important it is that we get top-down leadership on the plastics issue. We need legislation that's going to help shift that burden from consumers to the producers and manufacturers. So speaking of collective action, let me tell you a little bit more about Plastic Free MKE. It's a local coalition of nonprofits, government agencies, businesses, grassroots activists, all working together to reduce Milwaukee's dependence on single-use plastics. We run several volunteer-led initiatives. We have our grocery store educational initiative. So that's our plastic bag monster. Again, with 500 single-use plastic bags sewn on there. We've gone to grocery stores and just chatted with people as they're coming in and out. Hey, did you know? It's a nice conversation starter. People get really excited to come talk to us. We've helped local events go zero waste or near zero waste. So we worked with like the Milwaukee Marathon to get rid of those little cups of water that they have at all the stations. We made all those compostable cups and provided volunteers to help them out. We've worked with both the city and the county on their purchasing protocol and other policies to help reduce plastics there. We created a water refill station initiative that I'll talk a little bit more about in a second, as well as our Lake Friendly Business Program. We do community outreach and education. We have a group of volunteers that sews what are called boomerang bags. And so they sew these bags, they leave them at local stores. And then when you go in, you can take a boomerang bag, use it in your shopping, and then just remember to bring it back and leave it for someone else next time. We've done a lot of webinars. This is kind of our education and outreach part. We look at plastics from a lot of different angles. So we've talked about it. We've talked about microplastics. We've talked about plastics and smoking materials. So a lot of people don't know that cigarette butts are actually made out of plastic. And then all tobacco products come wrapped heavily in plastic. So tobacco usage actually has a huge plastic footprint as well. We've talked about policies regarding plastics and all sorts of angles that we've covered. Our Lake Friendly Business Program currently is focused on food service businesses, helping them reduce their plastic consumption and the plastics that they're pushing on their consumers. We have them meet these 6 requirements, and then there's a couple optional ones that they meet as well. And then they join the Lake Friendly Business Program, and we promote them, and we try and get people to come and support them. We're also working to expand this to other types of businesses that might want to cut down on their plastic consumption as well, and let their consumers know that they are making efforts, real efforts, to cut down on plastics in their business. In the summer of 2020, we've started providing water refill stations, both mobile and stationary, at local racial justice events, marches, block parties, any type of community event that normally would have piles and piles of single-use water bottles for members or participants. We come in with these refillable water stations, and people can either refill the water bottles they already have. We now have some funding, so we bought water bottles that we can now give out to folks if they don't have their own reusable water bottle. If they do use a single-use water bottle, we'll refill it for them so they're not using multiple single-use water bottles. So we were able to mobilize really quickly. Our volunteers are amazing, and they're very, very passionate. So we were able to get a whole bunch of people together and get out there and really support community events, keep people hydrated and safe, while also cutting down on our plastic consumption in Milwaukee. So those are just some of the initiatives. There's a lot of different ways that Plastic Free MK is working to turn off the tap on single-use plastics. We know that many hands make lighter work for this problem, so we're really proud of what we've accomplished so far, and we're really excited to keep working on this. One of the things that we would like to do is become a model for other communities. So if anything that we've done sounds interesting to you, and maybe you want to bring it up to Lake Superior or anywhere else that you might be around the area, we'd be so happy to share with you what we already have. We don't want anyone to feel like they have to reinvent the wheel. We can talk about the ways that we formed and organized and the things that we're doing. We're happy to share all of our materials. Some of the other things that we're doing is starting to talk to hospitals and larger business groups and like business incubators about working on plastics reduction at a scalable level, so a bigger level than some of our individual businesses. We're working on a citywide reusable container system that all Milwaukeeans can be a part of. It wouldn't necessarily be fee-based, depending on how we are able to set it up. So you might not need to pay extra to be a part of it, which is really exciting for us. And yeah, we just really want to be a resource for other communities and other individuals looking to help cut down on their plastic consumption. So with that, Erin, do you want to share the results of that last poll? Give maybe everybody a couple more minutes to put in their response.
Sure. I might relaunch it. I think I don't see any responses yet, so I think I'm going to end it and try again.
Okay.
Let's see here. And I think I'm not sure, it may have been one that I made it multiple choice. Oops. And so maybe I might have messed it up. I don't think I can relaunch it. That was my bad. Oops. Maybe you could just
we'll just talk about it.
Yeah, let's just talk about it. Sorry about that.
No worries. So yeah, the different options were volunteers picking up trash, individuals reducing their single-use plastic consumption, companies offering consumers more sustainable products, or legislation forcing companies to offer more sustainable alternatives. And then the last option was all of the above, which now that we've talked through this, I'm guessing that all of you would have gotten that one right. We do need all of the above. Make a dent in this problem. It's no one of those is going to fix it. We really need all of those to be a part of the solution. So those are the most effective ways. All of those together are the most effective way to reduce plastic waste in our environment, and to keep that, again, to help cut down on the pressure on climate change, to keep that out of our waters and out of our environment where it's impacting wildlife, and then also to keep it out of us, and to keep those health impacts as minimal as possible. All right, well, I think that's all I've got. So does anybody have any questions or comments, or do you just want to chat about different things? Yeah, I'll open it up to whatever people want to talk about now.
All right. Yes, we did get a couple. Let me get adjusted here. I'm gonna close that poll. So there one question in the chat. I work in a county where we are hosting a plastic-free challenge in February. We are focusing on motivations and values messaging. What messages and values have you seen are the most effective at engaging people in reducing their plastic use?
That's a good question. We've kind of gone all over the board with plastic-free MP. We've started with, talking about the environmental impact and those kind of really easy to see issues, but we've really started to focus on the health impacts, because that really impacts everyone. No one can escape that. And so it takes a little bit of education for that to work, because if you don't understand how plastics are impacting your health, you might not be super motivated by that. So maybe it just like, we've got some resources on our website, and I'm happy to share those with you too, just like different data and research that we've seen about how plastics are impacting your health, and maybe sharing out an article and then coming at it from that direction. I think also just the practice, not perfection. So letting people know that like every little bit really does help. Plastics can be really overwhelming. The more I learn about it, the more overwhelmed I get. And it can be really disheartening. So trying to keep it like, look, you can really make a difference. Yes, this is a tough problem, but we're all working on it together, and we're not trying to shame each other or make it harder for each other to participate. We really want to make it easy for everyone to get involved in whatever way makes most sense to them. I hope that helps. That was a really short answer, but feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to put some contact information in the chat.
And I did put the Plastic Free Milwaukee website in the chat, and this is probably a good time to mention that there were some requests from people even before today for the recording. So today is being recorded. It will be up on the Lake Superior Collaborative YouTube within, hopefully I can get up there within 24 hours, but I'm going to say 48 just to be safe. And I'll be sending everyone who registered, whether they're here or whether they could attend live or not, a follow-up with the link to the video and some of these links and resources that have been shared in the chat, and including Leah's contact information, which I think you're okay with.
Yeah, for sure. I accidentally just dumped it into the meeting room.
No, that's fine. So there was another question, which is, what can we do about plastics that are already in our water bodies?
Yeah, there are definitely some newer technologies coming out. They've focused a lot on like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, because that's the one that everyone knows about and people are getting motivated around. So there are technologies, people are, especially young people, are really motivated to work on this issue. There are other types of technology solutions that are coming out in the Great Lakes region. I'm blanking on the name of the organization right now. They're based out of Canada, but they have these great little filters. They need to be monitored every day. So you would need, like they're putting them in marinas around the Great Lakes region, but it's just like a little bucket that floats on the surface. And then water just naturally pours through it. And then there's a filter underneath. And so it captures all of the trash and debris that's flowing through the water in that marina. But it does need someone to be at the marina to empty it out every day and monitor how much plastic is coming through. So it's not easy for everyone to do solutions like that, but there are more and more solutions like that that are looking at ways of getting the plastic out of our water now that it's in there. I believe there are ways to filter it out of our drinking water and things like that, but they're really expensive. And most municipalities aren't able or haven't yet implemented them. So that's something that like needs more research and needs more funding and more support too, so that we can start to add those types of filters to our drinking water. That would take it out of our water, our beer, anything that's made with our water. So that would be really helpful. We do have products and technologies to do some of that work, but the motivation and the funding needs to really ramp up to make it effective.
Thank you. And I put an article in the chat. I think it might be what you're referring to. It was in Ontario. There's a couple different tools. I've also seen this like beach. It almost looks like a beach Zamboni that kind of like combs through the sand. But so there's like land and water innovations and new technologies coming up.
Yeah, we know that there's some researchers that are like looking at microplastics in the sand, right? Like how is it moving in our beaches and how is it going? It's really interesting to see the research that's being done.
I think this is a great question because I've done this myself, but it's sort of like once it's out of your hands, who knows where it goes. So this question is, what stores do you know that accept plastic bags and what do they do with them there? I've wondered that myself. Like there's those bins and kind of stuff them in and then you walk away.
Yeah, I do that all the time. So like big chain stores like Walmart and Target definitely accept them. In Milwaukee, most of our grocery stores do as well, although some of them stopped during the pandemic, and also some of them stopped because it was no longer economically feasible for them. So what happens is they have to collect them and store them until they have enough, so that their recycler will come and pick it up, or they have enough to make it worth it to ship it to the recycler. And then those are the things that are turned into like deck boards and benches. Things like that, because that really thin plastic, like that's not good for much. It's really hard to recycle that and turn that into something that's usable. But like, yeah, like those recycled plastic benches that we see sometimes, like those are pretty commonly made out of plastic bags. There are some other things made out of those as well. So they are turned into products. But like like my local co-op, for instance, had to stop accepting them because they didn't have any place to store them. They're so light and airy and fluffy, and they take up so much space. And it was really hard for them to collect enough to make it worth it for the recycler to come and pick them up. They had to like collect a semi-truck trailer load worth of them. And my tiny little co-op just didn't have space for that. So that's a challenge. That's why it's easier for bigger stores like Kroger and Target and Walmart and all that kind of stuff to collect them because they have more space.
Oh, that makes sense. Thank you. And another question, what have you found as the best way to get your message out there? Could it be social media, outreach, website, collaborations, or maybe even influential people?
Yeah, we try a little bit of all of the above. We have some volunteers actually that are really great with social media. They create graphics and stories and posts and things. And so we do share stuff out on like Facebook and Instagram. We have our website. We found during the pandemic, we haven't been able to go out to different places and do tabling events. So we started doing the webinars, and we actually found we increased our audience significantly because no one had to rush home from dinner to come to a meeting place and work with us. The kids could be running around in the background and doing their thing while, people joined us and learned more about plastic. It made it a lot easier. People could watch the recordings and things like that. So going online with some of our education has actually been kind of beneficial. We also, our whole coalition. So Plastic Free MKE, like I mentioned, is a movement, it's a coalition. And so we have 40 different agencies or nonprofit groups in our coalition. And if each one of them, or even just a handful of them, shares out Plastic Free MKE messaging, then it automatically hits 10,000, 20,000 viewers instead of just the people who are on the Plastic Free MKE page. So collective action is really a huge part of everything that we do. We need lots of different groups and individuals sharing that message just to try and spread the word faster. So that's been a really great thing for us.
And I don't see any more in the chat, but feel free. We still have a few minutes with Leah. I had a question when you mentioned that in Milwaukee there has been there was kind of that, I don't know if you'd call it a loophole, but a straw not being a container made it possible to ban that one item. I'm wondering with that map you showed with the preemptive bans on bans, is there any movement to try to back those bans on bans up? Or I'm just wondering, like, kind of how solid are those, and are they at the local level? I'm guessing they're at the state level, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, the ban in Wisconsin is pretty solid. Our legislature, there's definitely individuals working to get rid of that, but they're not making much headway because of the current makeup of our legislature. So Wisconsin's kind of stuck for now until we can repeal that ban on bans. The other ways that we're working to get around it, so like the city of Milwaukee can't ban anything or put taxes or fees on anything. But one thing that our county is working on is writing it into their contracts with their vendors to say that when you renew your contract, you have to agree to stop using styrofoam products. And so, for instance, in Milwaukee, the county owns a lot of property, and they have a lot of vendor contracts. So thinking about the airport, our zoo, a lot of our park systems. So if you want to have a business at the airport, when you renew your contract with the county, it hasn't passed yet. They're still working on it and trying to figure out the best way to do it and making sure that it's really equitable and inclusive. But hopefully in the future, if you want to have your business at the airport in Milwaukee, you're going to have to agree to not use styrofoam. Or if you want to have a party at a park, you're going to have to agree to not use styrofoam. So there are ways to get around it, but they're a lot harder and a lot less effective than if we could just ban it as they have in other places or put a fee on it. So we're working on all those little things.
Thank you. I wonder if people are thinking about, like, in their area how they could do something similar to Plastic Free Milwaukee. And I don't know if you've been there from the beginning of this coalition, but could you share more about, like, the roots of that and maybe how it got started? Because I think people are probably like, that seems great.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, we started 2018, summer of 2018. Actually, it's volunteer based from the beginning. Grassroots volunteers, they are the powerhouse of this coalition. So a few of them got together. They actually did a recycling tour. A few of them met at the recycling center tour, and they were like, this is a problem. What can we do about this? And at the same time, China passed its national sword policy, which was the policy that made them stop accepting our waste, our recycling waste, ours and from other countries. So all of a sudden, a lot of recycling markets were like, oh boy, we need a new buyer. We need someone else to take our trash and recycle it for us. And so a lot of municipalities were really scrambling. Milwaukee was not one of those because, again, we handle our own recycling here in Milwaukee. We have our own markets and things like that. So we weren't as impacted by that policy as other communities were, but it really was an eye-opening thing for these volunteers, and they started banding together and they started meeting monthly. They got space donated from a local nature center, and they just started getting together every month and thinking about what they could do on a larger level. They started thinking, oh, cleanups, let's get together and do cleanups. And then they quickly realized that that can't be the only thing that they're working on. So then they started like writing letters and joining. And when Milwaukee Riverkeeper learned about their movement in late 2018, early 2019, we thought, well, we've been thinking about this anyway, let's join on. And then we got all of our friends together, other nonprofits and our agency partners and other groups that we work with, and said, let's do this together. And that's when we formed the coalition. So it really started with just like a few very passionate individuals. But then again, like the more groups you get involved, the less work it is for everybody and the bigger impact it has. So it was a win-win to really just like build on that effort. And so still today, the volunteers are the boots on the ground. They come up with the ideas, the initiatives. We support them. We help, schedule people and post events, and we do the social media and the website and things like that. But the volunteers are the ones who are out doing a lot of the work. And then the coalition members, the businesses, the nonprofits, the other agencies, we're working on more of the policy angle, like where is the most effective way for us to kind of lean on this policy, and we're helping shape the county legislation and all of that stuff. So we're really just trying to come at it from all angles. And where we are now, like we have the capacity to come at it from a lot of different angles, but maybe you need to start smaller. Maybe it is just one thing to start, and then you build slowly from there. That's kind of how we did it.
Thank you for sharing that. And I really like how you're talking about flipping the script, so to speak, on from like personal, individual kind of guilt. And I mean, it's still about individual action, but thinking about it, the whole system of plastic production to disposal and whatnot. It's really nice to hear that. For my own, I put dog poop bags with this sad emoji in the chat, and that's really just like the guilt I feel every time I walk my dog. I just think, oh, but so it's kind of a relief just from a personal note to hear these things reframed.
That's a tough one for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think we're kind of at time, and I just want to thank everyone for coming. And like I said, you'll be receiving a follow-up email with a very, very short 3-question feedback form. You can also suggest future webinar topics or speakers, and also some feedback on today's webinar to help me plan improve our events in the future. But with that, I just want to say thank you so much again, Leah Holloway from Milwaukee Riverkeeper. And if you all have questions or emails in the chat, and I see some applause, and I know there's also some teachers who signed up for this who hopefully are sharing this with their students. So maybe, who knows, you might get some questions from classrooms, which will be exciting.
That would be awesome. We actually have a whole plastics education toolkit on our website. So if you are an educator,
great.
Please reach out to me or find that on our website. I'd be happy to share resources with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good lunch if that's where you're off to, or rest of your day.